Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We all kind of wrestle with those big questions sometimes, right? Like, what's it all about? What's the point of it all? Where do we find meaning?
Yeah, for sure. It's like this fundamental human drive, trying to make sense of our existence. And today we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff that tackles exactly that: nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism.
Right. Okay, so let's set the stage here. We're talking about a pretty massive shift in Western thought. It's this crisis of meaning that emerged as those traditional ways of explaining our existence kind of started to crumble.
Yeah, it wasn't a sudden thing, but more like a gradual erosion of those belief systems that had given people a sense of purpose and order for centuries. Like the foundation was slowly being chipped away at. And a lot of this really gained traction in the 19th and 20th centuries as science started offering explanations for the world that didn't need a divine being.
Right. The more we learned about how the universe worked, the less it seemed like we needed God to explain everything.
And some really brilliant minds at the time picked up on this, like Nietzsche, who argued that Christianity, with its emphasis on truth, actually ended up sawing off the branch it was sitting on.
It's funny how that works. The very pursuit of truth, which Christianity championed, led people to question its own doctrines.
Absolutely. And the 19th century was ripe for this kind of questioning. You had David Strauss in the 1830s with his book Life of Jesus, looking at the Gospels under a microscope and saying, hey, maybe the Bible isn't literal history, but a collection of myths and stories.
And that was huge at the time. It made people reevaluate these texts they'd considered sacred and unquestionable.
Mhm.
Then you have Ludwig Feuerbach, who took it even further with the essence of Christianity.
Right. Feuerbach argued that our idea of God is actually just us projecting our own human desires and qualities onto some imagined divine figure.
Like we create God in our own image rather than the other way around. And this idea influenced a lot of thinkers, even Marx, who applied similar thinking to social structures.
And then, boom, Darwin comes along in 1859 with On the Origin of Species. And if Strauss and Feuerbach were shaking the theological foundations, Darwin pretty much blew the roof off.
Totally. Evolution by natural selection, driven by chance and necessity. No divine plan needed. It was a radical shift in how we saw our place in the universe. We weren't some special creation anymore. We were part of a much bigger, much more impersonal biological process.
And this all leads us to Nietzsche's famous declaration, the death of God. Now, he wasn't talking about God literally dying, right? It was more about the death of the belief in a divine order, a God that gave meaning and purpose to our existence. And he captured this perfectly with his madman parable in The Gay Science.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image. You can almost picture it. A guy runs into a crowded marketplace in broad daylight, holding a lantern and yelling, "I see God! I see God!"
And the people who are more and more secular just laugh at him like he's some crazy relic from the past.
But the madman's not just confused. He's making a really profound point. He shouts, "We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers."
Chilling, right. It's like this realization that we as humans have dismantled the very foundation of our own belief system.
And then he goes on to describe this incredible sense of disorientation. Whither is God? How are we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon?
Such powerful imagery. It's like the compass we've used to navigate life has just shattered. We've lost our sense of direction.
Exactly. Is there any up or down left?
Yeah.
Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? It's that sense of emptiness, of being adrift, that really captures the essence of nihilism.
And the madman doesn't let up. He's like, do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. No mincing words there.
It's blunt, but it gets to the heart of the issue. The death of God means the loss of objective values, a universal moral code, any inherent purpose to our existence. And that's the big question nihilism raises, right? If there's no God, then what's the point?
Right. No divine lawgiver, no ultimate judge, no grand plan. So what are we left with? Philosophically, it's that loss of an external anchor for meaning. We can't just look to God or religion for answers anymore. And that's the meaning crisis nihilism points to.
Right.
This realization that life might just be inherently meaningless.
Right. And the scientific revolution, while amazing in so many ways, also presents this picture of a vast, cold, indifferent universe. And that creates this tension between our innate human desire for meaning and the apparent lack of it in the world around us.
But now, this confrontation with meaninglessness didn't send everyone spiraling into despair. In fact, it sparked some really interesting philosophical responses. And the two we're focusing on today are existentialism and absurdism.
Now, just a heads up, the relationship between these two can be a bit tricky. Some philosophers, like Camus, who we'll talk about with absurdism, are sometimes grouped with existentialists, but ultimately went their own way.
Right, even Heidegger, a big name in 20th century philosophy, rejected the existentialist label, so it can get messy.
Absolutely. The lines aren't always clear-cut. But for our deep dive today, we're going to mainly focus on Jean-Paul Sartre when we talk about existentialism.
He's probably the philosopher most closely associated with the term, and he actually called himself an existentialist, so it makes sense to start there.
Sartre was really grappling with this question of what it means to exist in a world without God. And his big idea was that existence precedes essence. To really understand this, we need to look back at how philosophers traditionally thought about things.
Like the classical view. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle believed that the essence of something, its fundamental nature and purpose, existed before any individual instance of that thing came into being.
Right, like a blueprint.
Right.
The idea of a chair, its essence to be sat upon, comes before any specific chair is made.
Think about a knife. The purpose of a knife, to cut, must exist before any particular knife is actually created. If a knife doesn't cut, it's considered flawed, a bad example of a knife.
Exactly. But Sartre flipped this idea on its head. For humans, he said, existence comes first. We are born, thrown into the world, without any predetermined purpose or essence.
And this is where we get that radical freedom that's so central to existentialism. If there's no pre-existing human nature, no divine plan, then we are totally free to define ourselves through our actions and choices.
We're not born with a script, we're writing it as we go.
Exactly. Sartre famously said, "Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself." Pretty profound, right?
Yeah, it means your job, your relationships, your values. None of that is set in stone. You're constantly creating your own essence, your own meaning, through the choices you make every single day.
And he took it even further, saying, there is no human nature, since there is no God to conceive of it, no fixed set of characteristics, no pre-assigned role. We're just thrown into existence, and then it's up to us.
And that's a huge responsibility.
Right. It's incredibly liberating, but also a bit terrifying.
Totally. So to sum up the existentialist response to nihilism, in a universe without inherent meaning, we are completely free and totally responsible for creating our own subjective meaning. And we do that through our actions.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so now let's move on to absurdism. And for this, we'll be looking mostly at Albert Camus's and his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus.
Camus really crystallized the idea of the absurd, even though you can find hints of it in earlier philosophers like Kierkegaard. And he starts his essay with a real attention grabber. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide.
Whoa. Right off the bat, he's going there.
He's saying that deciding whether life is worth living is the fundamental question of philosophy.
If life has no objective meaning, is ending it the most logical choice? It's a pretty heavy question to start with.
But Camus Diaz ultimately rejects suicide as a solution. He argues that it doesn't actually solve anything, it just avoids the problem. Death, he says, is just as meaningless as life.
So choosing suicide is like giving up, surrendering to the absurd, instead of confronting it head-on.
Exactly. Now, the second path Camus talks about is what he calls the leap of faith, or what some call philosophical suicide. This is when people find refuge in prepackaged belief systems that offer a ready-made meaning.
Right, like religion or even strict political ideologies, anything that promises to give you the answers and take away that uncertainty.
And Camus is pretty critical of this approach. He sees it as intellectual dishonesty, like you're trying to escape the discomfort of the absurd by clinging to comforting illusions.
Instead of grappling with the meaninglessness you sense deep down, you're just buying into someone else's answers.
Now, the third path, and the one Camus himself advocates for, is absurdism. It's not about finding meaning or escaping the lack of it, but about embracing that fundamental conflict between our yearning for meaning and the universe's indifference.
It's about living consciously with that tension, not trying to ignore it or cover it up with easy answers.
And it's about rebelling against that meaninglessness.
Not just accepting it passively, but actively pushing back against it.
Right. It's an affirmation of life, not in spite of the absurdity, but because of it. Camus actually critiques existentialists for trying to create meaning, saying they deify what crushes them and find reason to hope in what impoverishes them. He sees it as a kind of disguised religious impulse.
So for Camus, it's not about creating meaning, but about recognizing that there might not be any inherent meaning and living with that realization. As he put it, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion.
Now, to really understand absurdism, we have to look at Camus's central metaphor, the myth of Sisyphus. Do you want to quickly recap that story?
Yeah, sure. So Sisyphus was this king known for being clever and tricky. He actually managed to cheat death twice, which really ticked off the gods.
Oh yeah, they weren't happy about that.
So as punishment, they condemned him to this eternal, pointless task, rolling a giant boulder up a mountain, only to have it roll back down every time he gets near the top. And he has to do this forever.
Talk about a bad work day.
Right. But Camus sees Sisyphus as the perfect, absurd hero for three main reasons. First, he really loves life. He cheated death, after all, so he's clearly attached to being alive, which goes against the nihilistic idea of just giving up.
Makes sense. He wouldn't have gone to all that trouble to escape death if he wasn't into living.
Second, his punishment is just so absurd. It's not just physically difficult, it's completely pointless. There's no end goal, just endless, frustrating repetition.
Like a cosmic treadmill.
And third, Sisyphus is a rebel. He defied the gods, chose life over death. And even though his punishment is meaningless, he keeps going. He doesn't give in to despair, which is itself a kind of rebellion against the way things are.
It's like he's saying, you can give me this absurd task, but you can't crush my spirit.
And this is where Camus hits us with that powerful ending to the myth of Sisyphus. He writes, "I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well."
That line, he too concludes that all is well. It's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about choosing to find a kind of peace, even defiance, in the midst of a messed up situation.
Exactly. And then Camus finishes with, "This universe, henceforth without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy."
It's not a naive happiness, right? It's a hard-won, rebellious happiness. He finds meaning not in reaching some goal, but in the struggle itself.
Exactly. So to bring it all together, nihilism shows us the potential for meaninglessness. Existentialism empowers us to create our own meaning, even in a meaningless universe. And absurdism says, don't try to create meaning, embrace the absurdity, rebel against it, and find your own kind of joy in the struggle.
I mean, that's a lot to chew on. We've covered some pretty dense philosophical territory today, but hopefully you're walking away with a better understanding of how these ideas relate to each other and why they matter.
Right. And even if these ideas don't give you all the answers, they can really make you think about your own beliefs and assumptions. Like, where do you find meaning? What drives you?
Yeah, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What keeps you pushing that boulder uphill, so to speak?
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given that tension between our human need for purpose and this seemingly indifferent universe, what resonates more with you? Is it the freedom to forge your own meaning, or is it the rebellious embrace of the absurdity of it all?
Both are valid responses, I think. It really comes down to what speaks to you personally.
Exactly. So take some time to reflect on that. It might just spark some deeper insights about yourself and your own journey. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Always a pleasure. Until next time.